your host, Dr. Craig. And as always, we're exploring how media can shape our understanding of the world around us, and in particular, looking at some of the weird phenomena that's happened. We're setting up now for 2023. We've finished. For those that remember, we had the wonderful adventure into 1950s cinema with Vincent Price's House on Haunted Hill. Now we're shifting, back in time a little bit to radio drama, but I'll set that up in a bit. Before we go there, of course, we're streaming on edgeradio.org.au as well as streaming on YouTube and Twitch. So if you're into those new media platforms, just search for Media Mothership and you'll find us. You can leave a message, of course, on YouTube or Twitch, or message us here in the station on 0488811707 if you have anything in particular you'd like to share. And today's topic, as I mentioned, we're going into radio drama, and the reason we're doing that is January 1st was Public Domain Day in 2023. So I want to talk a little bit about the new works which have entered the public domain, which are no longer copyright, including some of the radio dramas that we'll be broadcasting here on Media Mothership, and using those radio dramas to explore storytelling and scriptwriting devices through some of the classic audio pieces of work. So keep listening here on Media Mothership on Edge Radio 99.3 here on Friday, 6th of January, 5:11 p.m. That's right. So as I mentioned, January 1st, 2023 is Public Domain Day around the world. And in particular, it's interesting, I guess, a show like this, of course, broadcasts on YouTube. So one of the things about that is that often we're beholden to US copyright requirements, which are slightly different in terms of the material we can broadcast than Australian. So I want to look firstly at the material that's hitting the public domain space, specifically in the US domain, because I think that has a large impact in terms of the global audience a piece of work can reach. If you're wanting to use these fictional characters and you're looking for a global market, the US market's important. So on January 1st, 2023, copyrighted works from 1927 will enter the US public domain. I'll also look at the works which are entering the Australian public domain. Those are really interesting as well. But first we'll start with the US. So these are works now that will be free for everyone to copy, share, and build upon. If you want to write your own fan fiction or fan video piece, you can, with no legal repercussions, now use these characters. So some of the big titles include Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, and I think most excitingly, the final Sherlock Holmes story written by Arthur Conan Doyle is now in the public domain, which is great. Moriarty, some of those fantastic characters are now fully in the public domain, as well as the German science fiction film Metropolis, which is a great piece of silent filmmaking. This is now fully in the public domain. It was actually in the public domain for a short period, then got pulled back into copyright, but it's now fully in public domain, as well as Alfred Hitchcock's first thriller. And for those that have been listening to the show, we've been referencing quite a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's idea of creating suspense. We've featured a couple of interviews he's done. So that's exceptionally exciting. And some compositions by Louis Armstrong and Fats Waller, and a novelty song about ice cream, which we might play. Why not, now that it's in the public domain? Again, we've got Arthur Conan Doyle's The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes has entered the public domain. So that's pretty much I think the entire canon now of Arthur Conan Doyle authored Sherlock Holmes pieces. Ernest Hemingway's Men Without Women, Franz Kafka's America is now in the public domain. Marcel Proust's Les Temps Retrouvés, sorry, I cannot speak French, translated, of course, In Search of Lost Time. Quite a lot. And these are just a handful of the thousands of books that are entering the public domain in 2023. If you want to know more, you can check out Duke University has a great list here. We've got some modernist masterpieces, poetry from the U.S. Harlem Renaissance period, children's verses featuring Winnie the Pooh. Because, I don't know if anyone recalls, there was that last year, the horror movie, Winnie the Pooh horror movie, that popped up. And that's because Winnie the Pooh and other characters have entered the public domain and can be used without seeking license approval from the copyright holders. Early work from Hemingway and Faulkner are there in the public domain. And again, most excitingly, I think Arthur Conan Doyle's final Sherlock Holmes story has now had its copyright expired, so it's moved fully into public domain. Even though, it's a notorious case with Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes because the Doyle estate had attempted to artificially extend rights over the Holmes and Dr. Watson stories far beyond the death of the author plus 70 years. So, what a relief. So movies entering public domain. There's some great movies. Jazz Singer, the first feature-length film with synchronized dialogue, directed by Alan Crosland. Wings, a World War I aviation drama, which was the winner of the first Academy Award for Outstanding Picture, directed by William A. Wellman. Wings is now in the public domain. An F.W. Murnau film, Sunrise, The Lodger, The King of Kings, Cecil B. DeMille film, London After Midnight, although that's considered a lost film, so Todd Browning's a la Frankenstein fame, who knows, maybe it'll turn up in a closet somewhere. The Way of All Flesh, which is also a lost film. No one knows where any prints are. Seventh Heaven, which was inspired the ending for the 2016 film La La Land. So if you want to see where a source of inspiration for La La Land, go check out Seventh Heaven, which allegedly inspired the ending of La La Land. Kid Brother starring Harold Lloyd, The Battle of the Century starring Laurel and Hardy. So some of Laurel and Hardy's work now is also in the public domain. Upstream, directed by the great Western director John Ford. So quite a lot of really interesting films coming into public domain. Some really, really interesting stuff. And I think certainly the fact that Sherlock Holmes's entire collection now is in the public domain is exciting. We'll see a lot of Sherlock Holmes knockoffs appearing everywhere, possibly, which I think is great because it does keep these characters in circulation. They truly are a kind of mass culture, popular culture. They truly get to re-become popular culture because of this public domain thing, rather than being suffocated behind extremely long copyright requirements. Death of author plus 70 years in many cases. Do check those out if you're looking for some exciting free public domain material to look at. In the Australian space, the National Library of Australia has a listing of public domain 2023 works. So this is, of course, every year on 1st of January, creative works come out of copyright. The legal requirements around copyright is that the work, even if the author or the group of talent working on a particular production completed that work that earlier in the year, it still remains in copyright till the end of the year and only goes out of copyright on 1st of January the following year. So yeah, 1st of January, we have a ton of stuff. So public domain means works that are no longer in copyright. That means that anyone can freely, without need for copyright permission from the original maker, use those works. You can copy them, publish, adapt them, or incorporate them in new works, which I'm most interested in. Maybe some new League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type works, if any fans of Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which combined, The Invisible Man, Jekyll and Hyde, Mina Harker, Dracula, it had all Alan Quatermain, all characters that were in the public domain at the point that piece was done. So in Australia, the new National Library collection, items that have now slipped into public domain are those which had been unpublished works by authors who died in 1952 or were created and released in 1952, and government publications created in 1972. So some of the big highlights in the Australian public domain include the personal papers of journalist and media proprietor Sir Keith Murdoch. So if you're wanting to bone up on your history of the media mogul Rupert Murdoch, maybe look at his dad's work, Sir Keith Murdoch. And these include a letter Sir Keith wrote to British Prime Minister Henry Asquith in 1915, introducing his now iconic Gallipoli letter, initially written to the then Prime Minister Andrew Fisher. The 1915 Gallipoli letter provided an important update on the Gallipoli campaign. Due to its significance, it's now included in UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. So yeah, check out the 1915 Gallipoli letter, now in public domain, so you can incorporate it in your fan fiction, if you want. Personal papers of William Billy Hughes, the 7th Prime Minister of Australia, quite a notorious character. It includes correspondence relating to Hughes's attendance of the Paris Peace Conference, held January to July 1919 after World War I. The Hughes papers form one of the largest collections of personal papers held in the library. Yeah, Billy Hughes's work. Maybe some provocative white Australia narrative coming out of those. 2 letters that George Pearce, an Australian politician, wrote in his role as the Minister of Defence, ahead of journalist Keith Murdoch's appointed visit to Egypt and Gallipoli in 1915. So yeah, quite a lot of interesting World War I stuff. Interestingly, the National Library of Australia has released a series of hole-proof hosiery advertisements for stockings for 3 different occasions. Each poster features a well-known Australian model. An additional poster of artwork features Santa. All those are in public domain for your fan fiction enjoyment. 9 booklets from memorial services to commemorate the passing of late King George VI, held throughout Australia in February 1952. Not as exciting as some of the stuff that is entering the US public domain, but this is, again, Australian work here that has entered the public domain now because it was finally released. This is work that authors who died in 1952 or orphan works, that's works with no known author which were created in 1952. So those pieces of work are now in the public domain to enjoy. Yeah, really exciting. Which brings us to a voyage that we're doing on Media Mothership presently, which is exploring some of the radio dramas which have entered the public domain. And we're going to start with a real classic. I've been looking and sifting through some classic radio dramas. We're just going to serialize them in a way. I want to kind of set them up and discuss a little bit about why these pieces of work are so interesting. The first one is Three Skeleton Key, which is a really, really interesting radio drama. It's many people's top 5 choices of kind of fun radio dramas. It's based on a short story written by the French author Georges Gustave Tudor, back in 1937, and it's considered, one of these really remarkable pieces of suspense work. Certainly, in terms of Georges Gustave Tudor's canon of work, this is the one he's most remembered for, and it was turned into a radio play a number of times. And what we're going to listen to today is the setup of the Vincent Price version of this, which appeared on Escape, the Escape radio drama in 1950. So we're going to enjoy the setup for this, and what I'm most interested in and what I want to explore within Three Skeleton Keys is just the setup of how you create an effective setup in your piece of radio drama. So what we're going to do is we're going to play the first 5 minutes. I'm going to include the show promo for Escape, because I think it's fantastic. It has that kind of 1950s radio pizzazz. And we'll listen to 5 minutes of it and discuss a little bit about what they're setting up in this original and what many people consider the best version of Three Skeleton Key suspense story. So sit back and enjoy.
Tired of the everyday routine? Ever dream of a life of romantic adventure? Want to get away from it all?
We offer you Escape! Escape, designed to free you from the four walls of today for a half hour of high adventure.
Tonight, we escape to a lonely lighthouse off the steaming jungle coast of French Guiana, and a nightmare world of terror and violence, as we bring you again, in response to hundreds of requests, Three Skeleton Key, starring Vincent Price.
Picture this place. A gray tapering cylinder welded by iron rods and concrete to the key itself. A bare black rock, 150 feet long, maybe 40 wide. That's at low tide. At high tide, just the lighthouse, rising 110 feet straight up out of the ocean. And all about it, the churning water, gray-green, scum-dappled, warm as soup, and swarming with gigantic bat-like devilfish, great violet schools of Portuguese man-o'-war, and yes, sharks, the big ones, the 15-footers. And as if this weren't enough, there was a hot, dank, rotten-smelling wind that came at us day and night off the jungle swamps of the mainland. A wind that smelled like death. A wind that had smelled the slow and frightful death that came one night to this bare black rock. Set in the base of the light was a watertight bronze door, and in you went, and up. Yes, up and round, past the tanks of oil and the coils of rope, casks of wicks, racks of lanterns, sacks of spuds and cartons and cans, and up, round and round. Over the light storeroom was the food storeroom, and over the food storeroom was the bunk room where the three of us slept. And over the bunk room was the living and cooking room, and over the living and cooking room was the light. She was a beauty, big steel and bronze baby with the sun gleaming through the glass walls all about, bouncing blinding little beams off the big shining reflectors, glittering and refracting through her lenses, the whole gigantic bulk of her balanced like a ballerina on the glistening steel axle of her rotary mechanism. She was a sweetheart of a light. And at night, she'd lie there on the stone deck of the gallery with her revolving smoothly and quietly over your head, easing her bright white eye 360 degrees around the horizon. You'd lie there watching to see that the feeders kept working, that everything ran right. And it wouldn't be bad, the other two fellows snoring in their sacks 2 levels down. You'd smoke your pipe to kill the stink of the wind, and it wouldn't be bad. About those other two, Louis and Auguste. What a pair. Louis, he was head man, was a big fellow from the Basque country, black beard, little hard black eyes, and a pair of arms that I tell you, those arms were as big around as my legs. Yes, head man he was, and what word he let go was law. A silent fellow, and although I spent my first 2 weeks trying to strike up a real conversation, the most I could ever get out of him was...
Jean, I took up this profession because I don't like people. They want to talk too much. It's quiet work, light tending. Let's keep it that way. You're getting to be as bad as Auguste. I thought maybe for once they'd send me somebody who
That
could keep
was
his
Louis.
mouth shut.
And when he accused me of becoming like Auguste, I quieted down, because Auguste was the talkingest man I'd ever met. The talkingest and the ugliest. He was hunchbacked, stood 4 feet high, had red hair and big blue eyes. It seems he'd been an actor in Paris.
Yes, indeed. Played in over 200 different productions, dear boy, at the Grand Guignol. Oh, but it was monstrous horrible, the way we used to scare the audiences. I was hated. Yes, they used to throw things and hiss and bare their teeth at me. Finally, it got too bad. I couldn't stand it any longer. I gave up the theater. My nerves, you understand. Yes, gave it up completely. I really did. Couldn't stand it any longer.
All right, so we'll pause it there for a second. This is Three Skeleton Keys, broadcast first on Escape back in 1950, starring, of course, Vincent Price. And again, it's involving, as we can see there, the setup is involving a trio of lighthouse point keepers who find themselves, as we'll hear soon, besieged by something. What's interesting here, and what I talk about in the first 5 minutes, so this is a 30-minute radio drama that we'll listen to, and the first 5 minutes is really interesting to me because it's so effectively doing this setup idea. So to hear a little bit about where setup is significant and often the mistakes that can happen in setup, I've found this quite good short little 3 mistakes screenwriters make in Act 1 that ruin the screenplay by Michael Haig. And what's really interesting about this is how it breaks down where that first act can go wrong so often, but what it is that you need to do in a first act to do it well. So as we've heard there in the start of Three Skeleton Key, the setup has... being able to get some good character, and we're kind of being introduced to the 3 light keepers that are there, who are going to be our main characters. But let's first listen to what Film Courage has to say about 3 mistakes that you can make and how maybe this piece of work avoids that.
Mistakes that writers make in the first 2 stages of writing the screenplay, which compromises the first act and then subsequent acts. What are usually the first parts that end up compromising the entire work?
Yeah, I would go actually a little further with your question. I would say if you have problems in the first 2 stages, it's impossible for your script to work. I have this sort of motto, and that is, if you're having story problems, all roads lead to the hero's outer motivation. Because one of the biggest issues, one of the most difficult things for writers to really embrace is this idea that at the very foundation of any story is a visible goal that the hero wants to cross at the end of the story. They'll get so caught up in the inner journey, in the depth or dimension of the character, or in the themes they want to deliver, or they'll just think the premise is good, so they get lost in a thicket of events and plotting, until finally they're just coming up with new ideas and adding idea after idea, and it becomes so complicated and so confusing that there's no story there.
So what's really interesting here about what we're hearing from Michael Haig about the three mistakes that often befuddle a story, and again he goes on to talk about those three mistakes being you don't have a visible goal, you're not establishing the daily life of the characters, and you're rushing the story to build the conflict. Those are the three concerns that he'll go on to talk about. What's interesting there is as we've listened to with Three Skeleton Key, we haven't really heard the goal for the characters in those first 5 minutes, but what we are hearing is, and again, this is the most significant thing that Michael Haig talks about, which is establishing the daily life of your characters. So I want to skip ahead a little bit to hear about what the significance of establishing daily life for these characters.
Second thing is not showing the everyday life of the character before they get into the story moving forward. We have to have a setup. It can be very brief, or a character can be on the move, so to speak, action-wise. They can have just arrived in a town and we see them going, or they're going to a meeting, or going to meet with a hitman, or whatever it might be. But nonetheless, it has to convey this is who this character's been for some time, and it has to create empathy.
Like Rambo. He arrives.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Brian Dennehy
So we'll find out what happened prior to that, but the first big event that's going to happen to him doesn't happen on page 1. We first have to get acquainted and identify or empathize with this character. And that empathy must occur immediately. We have to empathize before we start seeing what the flaws to the character are, before we start recognizing what this inner conflict is, or what this identity is, or what dark places they might go. First, we have to just connect with them emotionally.
So I think that's such an important point about setting up an emotional connection with your character initially, at the outset, so your reader or your audience is going to care about what happens to them next. The dark twists, as we'll hear in Three Skeleton Key, that will befool our protagonist. What's interesting is one of the examples that's given by the interviewer is Rambo. So at the start with Rambo, if you remember First Blood, we do see some good, just everyday experience that he has. So, of course, in Rambo, for those that have not seen it, Sylvester Stallone plays John Rambo, a Vietnam War vet, and he's going to, movie starts, Act 1, with him arriving in a small town to catch up with an old war buddy who's the only other survivor of the platoon he was in Vietnam. And we have a scene which establishes this setup, which Michael Haig is talking about, where there'll be an emotional connection, where we're seeing them not necessarily talking about their goal. At this point, it was just to catch up with a friend. Rambo wanted to catch up with his army friend. But unfortunately, that scene, he goes to the house, knocks on the door, the wife says, oh, unfortunately, he just died 2 years ago of cancer. And we have this real sense of emotional impact that Rambo's alone, the only other survivor of the platoon is now passed. He's the only guy left of that cohort that went to Vietnam, and that then sets up this emotional connection that we might have with Rambo, the tragic figure of Rambo. Now, in Three Skeleton Key, what we have, I think equally in the 5 minutes we've listened to, a setup of the everyday. Right, so at the moment, Vincent Price's character, it's a first-person story, is talking about this lighthouse. Is describing the number of stairs, the levels that you have to walk up, the mechanics of the light that's going around. And at the end of those 5 minutes, we're being introduced to the other two characters. And we have the voice actors coming in to lend their own particular panache to the performance. And we're knowing that, in just 5 minutes, quite a lot of background to the characters. Vincent Price is the main character, or the first person character that's providing us the narrative. We know that the other lighthouse keeper is a solitary guy who likes the power trip of being the head lighthouse keeper, but is really antisocial. And then you have the overly verbose, talkative performer clown character who is really irritating. So again, we have these really nicely crafted scenes of setting up the life of the characters first. So again, this is 30 minutes. And what's really interesting about listening to these golden age radio dramas is how tight they are in their delivery of information. So again, let's listen to the next few minutes, trying to see how this process of setting up the life of the character is going, and what this is building up in this first act. So by the time we've hit the 25% mark of the 30 minutes, we should have built up, according to Michael Haig, some clear goal, right, by the end of this act that's going to carry through for the entire story. A setup of the life of the characters first, right? So we've had description of the lighthouse, introduction of the two other lighthouse keepers. We know that there's three there, and it's isolated. And now, in these next few minutes, what I want to listen to is the build-up of this story. Not necessarily rushing the story, but how it's going to build this conflict. So let's get back to Escape's three skeleton key.
It all started one morning at 2:30. I was on watch, lying on the cool stone deck, pulling on my pipe, staring out at the blackness, the phosphorescent combers, and the big yellow stars, when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something show up for a second, something the light had touched, far off. I waited for her to come around again, and when she did, there it was. A three-master, a big one, about a half-mile off, and coming down out of the north-northwest, coming straight for us. You must understand, our light was where it was for a very good reason. Dangerous submerged reefs surrounded us, and ships kept clear. But this one, this sailing vessel, was coming straight on. I went over to the gallery door and yelled, "Louis! Louis!" Couldn't understand it. I waited for the light to come around again.
What is it? Ship headed for the reefs. Hurry right up.
I had the glasses out now. I couldn't read her name, but I could see her quite plainly. All sails set, the foam creaming away under her bow, her beautiful lines. A Dutch ship, I guessed her. But why didn't she turn? Every time it passed, our light hit her with the glare of day.
Ship? Where?
North-northwest. The light will touch her in a moment.
Can't they see?
Look at her. She just keeps coming on.
Yeah, the squarehead.
What is it? What is it?
Watch north-northwest.
I know what it is.
Huh? What?
The Dutchman, the Flying Dutchman. We did a play about her once. Oh, what a performance. You ghastly galleon, hag-ridden, curse-riven, must on.
Shut up, will you? She's luffing.
Yes.
Sloppy way to come about. She's derelict, that's it.
Derelict?
Abandoned. The crew left her for some reason or other. But instead of sinking, she's gone on, running before every wind.
She'll not run long. Not with these reefs to break her up.
A beautiful ship. Now, why would men leave a beautiful ship like that?
So we have this wonderful question now as we're coming to the end of Act 1 with why would people have left this beautiful ship abandoned? So as we've heard here, we've had the setup in terms of, in the first 5 minutes, a really solid description of the location, and according to script writing guru Michael Haig, we've got a very strong setup of the life of the characters, right? So Vincent Price's characters, And now the two characters are really nicely set up in those first 5 minutes. So that now, as we're building the story at the 25% mark, we can see some conflict emerging. All right, so let's actually listen quickly to what Michael Haig says about where this third moment in a film or a story, as you're doing the setup, can go wrong. Here we go.
And the third thing I would say is jumping from the setup right to the outer motivation. In other words, I think because screenwriters are inundated with the idea that you got to grab the reader right away and you got to get things going and Hollywood movies move fast and so on, all of that is true, but it doesn't mean you rush the story. What it means is you start building in conflict as soon as you can. But you don't rush the story. It's going to take all of Act 1 to get your hero to the point where they really begin pursuing that visible finish line. And if you start at page 10 with them pursuing the goal, your script is going to die around page 70 because you can't sustain a single goal that long. So you've got to take the whole stage 1 and stage 2 just to build up, to create the opportunity in the new situation, to get them oriented, to build up to the point where they have the goal and then they take that first step. And that's what has to happen at 25%.
So that's really interesting in terms of this idea of having both some discussion of the characters' lives in terms of what their past is, some flavor to who they are, and then not rushing the story. But that first idea, though, that he has of a visible goal, he provides a very good description of Inception as a way of understanding how to kind of crystallize a goal quite effectively. So let's listen to this quickly.
One of the biggest issues, one of the most difficult things for writers to really embrace is this idea that at the very foundation of any story is a visible goal that the hero wants to cross at the end of the story. They'll get so caught up in the inner journey, in the depth or dimension of the character, or in the themes they want to deliver, or they'll just think the premise is good, so they get lost in a thicket of events and plotting until finally they're just coming up with new ideas and adding idea after idea, and it becomes so complicated and so confusing that there's no story there. If you think about it, most Hollywood movies in particular are based on very simple story ideas. Even if you take a story that you think is fairly complex, like Inception, okay? That seems pretty complicated. I had a little trouble grasping some of that, but it's very core, it's very simple. A group of people wants to penetrate a person's dreams down to a layer where they can change his behavior without him knowing it. And that's it. I was able to say that in 5 seconds and 1 sentence. And that, everything is built on that goal. And if you have that kind of clear through line, and if when you say what that goal is, everybody gets the same image of what achieving that goal is, then you've laid a foundation that most scripts don't honestly have.
So let's pause it there. So again, we have that idea of being able to simplify, have a simple story that has a clear goal. And we're about to get around to that. I'll play the short sequence, the remaining sequence of this first act, in 3 Skeleton Key, just to get us to this point of seeing, now that we've had the kind of character life established, point 2 for Michael Haig, we're about to get to what the goal is, apart from just being good lighthouse keepers. So let's return now quickly to 3 Skeleton Key with Vincent Price from Escape.
She didn't ram us, although we all expected it. But as we waited for the crash, she luffed again, caught some odd gust, and went about. We watched her the rest of those black hours, heeling and rocking, pushed and pulled by every stray wind, every freak current. Watched her until the dawn came, till the sea turned from black to a pearly gray. And on she came again, heading for us. We all had our glasses trained on her now.
August, you can kill the light.
Right, Chief?
She doesn't look so good by daylight. Think she'll ground this time? What? I say, do you think she'll ground this time?
Huh? This is impossible. Absolutely impossible.
What?
Here, take my glasses. They're better than yours.
All right. And what is it you're... I had to focus, and then my breath froze in my throat. The decks were swarming with a dark brown carpet that looked like a gigantic fungus, but undulating. And on the masts and yards, the guys and all were hundreds, no thousands, I don't know, an endless number of enormous rats.
There we go. There we go. A wonderfully exciting moment now as the three lighthouse keepers on Three Skeleton Key. So this rocky outcrop, which is kind of on the fingertips there, and pretty much, the only way you can get to this lighthouse is via boats, have confronted their challenge, which is a derelict boat is about to ground itself on the rocky shores where the lighthouse resides. Releasing onto it, it appears to be an enormous horde of rats that are undulating, as our narrator says, over the boat like a hairy carpet. So there we go. So the goal, the setting up, again, we can speculate the goal being, can they survive the ensuing horde of rats which are about to descend upon their lighthouse and our poor three lighthouse keepers? Three Skeleton Key. Why is it called Three Skeleton Key? It's an odd one. Three Skeleton Key. And it's called this, interestingly, as a kind of a reference to a very haunted connection where three escaped convicts attempted to abscond with a canoe. They made it onto this rocky outcrop, and they barely they died sadly of thirst, and the only thing when people finally found them were their skeletons, these three skeletal remains, thereby bequeathing the name Three Skeleton Key to this particular rocky outcrop area, in memory of these three convicts who had died and perished, leaving behind only their skeletons. So there we go. That's Media Mothership for the start of 2023 for today. We'll be exploring, again, storytelling via these classic radio dramas. We'll return to Three Skeleton Key next week to at least get through the middle section in terms of how this story develops its second act, and then we'll conclude with the third act the week after next. Again, exploring the way in which we can avoid, hopefully, some of the mistakes that Michael Haig mentions around creating good stories there. So yeah, keep listening here to Edge Radio 99.3. It's been a pleasure to have your company today. Coming up next, we have Adrian with You Can't Sit Down. So keep listening to some exciting music here on Edge Radio 99.3.